Andrew Crompton is an architect at the University of Liverpool. His focus includes exploring the phenomenon of multi-faith spaces. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew. I want to get right to it. I think a lot of people are watching. We heard what Oliver just said. When it comes to mind, how does one begin to rebuild something that was built in the 13th century that has suffered this kind of colossal damage?
Well, you can never do it in quite the same way. It's like having a bit of plastic surgery. You're never quite the same afterwards. If they're sensible, if they're lucky, they will have laser scanned the building, and they'll have a photogrammic laser scan of it, which means they can make a virtual model that is very accurate, and that would enable them to replace stonework and probably the timbers in exactly the same pattern. But of course, it would be a copy. It would not be the same thing.
Incredibly heartbreaking. Now, Notre Dame had been in despair for years, undergoing a $180 million facelift. Tell us about the history of this building and the importance of this cathedral, not only to Paris, but to the entire world.
Well, it's the most important building in France. It is, in a sense, it is France. It's on the Ile de la Cité, which is an island in the River Seine, and that's where France begins, and from where it expands from this tiny little island, like a sort of miniature Manhattan. It grows to encompass, you know, this, what in the end was an empire, and it all grew out of this tiny little place, which eventually became the site for Notre Dame, the cathedral, and it's embedded in literature and in art. We know it even, you know, for example, through Victor Hugo and the Notre Dame de Paris novel, which we now see in films, even in Disney. Disney has made a film about this building.
Yeah, that's
how big it is, really.
It is hard looking at the photographs of the way it used to look, because this fire started in broad daylight with the famed spire collapsing in full view of a world audience. I want to talk to you more about this structure, something going back to 1100, they were completed sometime around 1260, yes. I believe. For those who have never been inside and seen the cathedral, talk about that, because I read that it was something like 10,000 oak trees were needed to build the massive roof inside.
Well, the roof is like a ship upside down, and it's the size of a modern ship. These cathedrals were the biggest buildings in the world when they were put up, and they took sometimes, well, over a century to build, sometimes many centuries, and people would start them not knowing when they would be finished or if they would ever see them be finished. So it was a labor of love that involved everyone in the community, which is the sort of thing we don't do now, where we want everything in 5 minutes. And to see it burn down in 5 hours is truly shocking. And the pictures I thought of the flames against the blue sky were some of the most ghastly and disturbing images I've seen since the Twin Towers.
I think a lot of people were reflecting back to that.
Really
Church
horrible.
Officials and other officials and official responders were busy trying to save much of the priceless art and the holy relics inside. I imagine it is going to be an agonizing few days for Parisians in the coming. Where does one begin to assess the damage? And I know French President Macron is really hopeful to rebuild, but you still have to start somewhere.
Well, they can replace and rebuild the stonework, which after all was mostly resurfaced in the 1840s. The roof, which would have been medieval, is gone. The stained glass windows, which were, I've heard that 3 of those, the medieval round, the rose windows, have exploded, so they're gone. But we hear a lot of the portable works of art were carted out, and some of them would have been removed prior to the restoration. So, you know, there will be something left. And the part that people very often visit, if you go to Paris, you'll go up the winding staircase on the North Tower and stand on the roof and look out over Paris, over the gargoyles' heads. It's a very famous view. Many of the listeners will have done it. Is still there. So, you know, we should be thankful for that.
A place to begin. Andrew Crompton, thank you very much for your insight. We greatly appreciate it.